you write down the milestone you want to accomplish. And then once you have that milestone, you ask the question, what would have to be true?
What would have to be true for X? Write it all down. So again, if we're talking about for a founder, for instance, to start a new business, what would need to be true for me to start a new business? First, I would need to have a team and I have to have an idea. It has to be a big enough market size. It has to be something that I'm credible at and to be the founder of. It has to be something I love and want to work on for the next 8.2 years or more, because that's how long it takes to go from starting a company to an exit on average. Then we would need to understand, like, okay, I would need funding. Like, how would I do that? Would it be from venture, friends and family, angels, a grant, like, right? But a list of all the things that would need to be true for me to succeed as a founder of a company that has funding, right? All right. So then from those, we can back out of that. That's like, let's say in a year, 6 months, whatever it is, I want this goal. So then what would have to be true in a month for me to know that I'm on track to that goal?
Well, hi, Sarah. So good to have you. Welcome to Unfinished Business. We're so excited to have you on the episode today.
Hi, Alex and Lee. I'm so excited to be here.
It's very special to have you here because we're here to talk about pivoting, whether it's a life pivot or work pivots. It's something that our audience is very excited to learn from, because a lot of them are going through these life transitions or these work transitions. And how do you navigate the ups and downs that come with it? So as a first question, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper on the life front. I know you started as a lawyer, how you transitioned to being an entrepreneur, and that's actually how we all met. We're all running our own startups, to now being an executive coach and doing that whole piece. And would love to understand from your perspective how that shift happened. How did you first realize that you wanted to have these transitions? And they obviously are big life shifts. How was it emotionally? How did you feel? Did you talk about it with your husband? I know your first company you ran together with your husband, so that'd be interesting to hear about. But also from a more rational brain, how did that make you feel? How did, what came into consideration to make sure that you were taking the right step?
Yeah, I think, thank you for having me on to talk about this topic, because it's an area that's really close to my heart. And so I've had, my life has been defined as I'm 44, I just turned 44. So as I think back on my past 20 something years, I'm finding there's these few things that happen, life events that were really defining. So it's like, obviously, like getting married, having kids, that stuff. But like for me, I've had a couple of really hard things happen in my life that I had no control over and no agency. And so the loss of control, right? Pivots can be all kinds of things. Pivots can be really small shifts. Pivots can be giant things. Pivots can be personal, professional. You can choose them. They can happen to you, right? Or you can have no control over them. And as I look back at my career and my life so far, the number one thing that comes up for me is like, I'm really good at pivoting. And I think that's a really important thing as an entrepreneur, is like, there's only so much you can control, just like in life. So your ability to control how you react to those things is kind of your only agency sometimes. And how you take the data in front of you and make a decision, and speed does matter in a lot of these things in business and in life. So I think, I started my life with a very nice upbringing. I didn't really have anything like any trauma that I went through as a kid or anything. I grew up the child of 2 lawyers. And so just kind of figured I would like follow that path, and I would have this like simple life, and I would become a lawyer, and I would bring justice into the world. And like, that was kind of what I was planning to do, be a trial lawyer. And so I started on that path and did it, and wasn't happy, and was, as the child of 2 really happy attorneys, I knew that is a possibility. Like, attorneys can be happy, and I did not feel like that. And so I felt a little stuck, to be honest. And I had kind of started to figure out in these like micro pivot theme, like, what can I do to change this scenario? Like, I don't like what I'm doing. I've now been practicing for a few years. You kind of get pigeonholed into the law, into like what you learn and what you're doing. And I saw this opportunity to go in-house at Google. And the the opportunity there was like, if I go in-house at Google and I start working on corporate stuff, I can like transition into a totally different area of law. I can pivot out of this litigation that I've been doing. And while I was there, and I don't know, I don't want to do this run-on sentence story, but like that it informs a lot of what you asked. I was pregnant with my first child, and I went out on my maternity leave, and unfortunately, we lost our daughter. She passed away right before she was due. And so I went from somebody who was at like, thank you. Yeah. And I know I've, shared this with you both, and you're both parents. And, but that was like the first really terrible, horrible thing that happened to me. And it took me by surprise is like an understatement. There was not a universe where that was a scenario that I was prepared for.
Yeah. I mean, it's the shock of going through that. And how did that impact the rest of your life? Because you had just gone through that first pivot. Did that traumatic event then lead you to making new decisions about your life?
Yeah. I mean, I was in shock, right? And had to figure out how to like handle this. It was really hard on my marriage, like all parts of life. And for whatever reason, I honestly don't know why I did it. But I went back earlier than my maternity leave would have been. Like I pushed myself to go back early. And I was living in San Francisco, and I was commuting to Google HQ in Mountain View, which is not a great drive for anyone who's done it. And was just in a lot of emotional pain, and actually some physical pain. Like I had some physical, I had a C-section, and then I had this crazy back problem. And I was just probably at one of the lowest parts of my life. And I was doing this drive, and it was almost like one day I just kind of woke up and was like, I don't have to do this. It occurred to me that for the first time in my life, I didn't have to do the thing that I had thought I was going to do. It I gave myself permission in some way.
It's a similar mindset shift that you had experienced prior with that first transition that, no, I'm not happy as an attorney.
Yeah.
I am looking for a change.
Kind of far less strategic. The first time it really was okay, what would a smart person do to maneuver themselves out of this situation? Okay, I'll do this, I'll do that. This makes sense. It'll lead me here. This second time it was literally driving down to Mountain View and being fuck it.
Was it more emotional?
Yeah, I was just it was a light turned on, and I was I don't have to go here. I don't have to go back to Google. I literally went in and talked to my, manager, and she was I totally get it. And she's come back if you want. I was I don't know if I'm going to ever come back, and left for the day. And then I came home to my husband Thornton and was we should move. I don't want to be at this department anymore. These things that had just not occurred to me. I was I'll just go back to my regular life. I all of a sudden was something woke up inside me. No, I'm not going to do that.
I would love to know a little bit then when you had this aha moment that, I don't have to keep on this path. I can take a new path. What is that step you took? Because I think there's a lot of listeners who might be somewhat unfulfilled with what they're doing right now. And sorry, my baby's actually waving at me right now. Hello. But for the listeners that are on a path that they're not finding fulfilling, what is that step that they can take? It sounds like you took drastic steps, but did the first time when you were a lawyer for that new thing, was it a small step? And even when you're coaching your clients today who are in certain roles, what do you recommend? What is the playbook for people who might not be fulfilled and looking for something else? What's your playbook you give them?
That's a great question, Lee. And I think it's a good differentiation, right? It's there's this pivot that's intentional, strategic, I have agency. And then there's the pivot that potentially you don't have as much control over. And we can talk about both of those. And so the first kind of pivot from I'm on this path of being a litigator and I want to figure out how to get off of this, right? And frankly, at that point, I didn't really know I wanted to be an entrepreneur in that way. And we can kind of get to that decision came soon after kind of where we were in the story. But that first time, and what I tell my CEOs that I work with and founders, which it's funny, the word coach to me is such an interesting word, and one that frankly I'm not 100% comfortable with. I like to think of myself in a lot of ways as an advisor. We go into coaching, I can put on a coaching hat, but I'm also here to help CEOs work backwards from a goal and a plan, and how do we create OKRs, and how does that cascade through the company, and things like that. But it comes down to a lot of that. So for me, even in that moment, I was like, what's the goal that I want? I want to not be a litigator. Like I want to switch to a different kind of law. At that point, it was a smaller pivot, right? What's the thing I'm working backwards from? Getting the experience I need. I want to be in a different kind of law. I want to be a different kind of lawyer. So I need to get this kind of experience that I'm going to need. So it was like the first thing I did, even as a litigator, was like start asking at my firm if I could start working on employment law. I remember I was like, employment law is an area that straddles both of those, litigation and corporate law. So if I do that, I'll have a little bit more experience that I can then like pivot into a different kind of job. And so in my life and in the work I do with my clients and CEOs and as a founder, we are always working backwards from a milestone. Like whether for a founder, there's one of 3 milestones we're always working backwards from: a fundraise, getting to cash flow positivity, or an exit, right? Depending on what that target is, our tactics are going to change for how we're going to get there and what we need to do in the meantime. So for me at that moment, it was like my target was like getting to be a corporate lawyer. And it was this more strategic planning of like, what would I need to be a corporate lawyer? What would need to be true? This is a question I ask all the time to founders. What would need to be true for us to hit that milestone, for us to raise successfully, or to get to the end of this year and know we're on track? So what would need to be true for me to be able to credibly seek a job as a corporate lawyer? Well, I would need to like have some experience as a corporate lawyer. Okay. How would I do that? Well, I'd figure out an area that I can like get a little bit of exposure to and start asking for more work in that area from my firm and from the partners. And so it was a more strategic process of what experience would I need to make me credible, to be this thing, get the experience track. Okay, now I was like, I'm going to work at Google. So it was like, who do I know that works at Google? Like,
That sounds like a very rational thinking.
Very rational.
Very rational process.
Unlike the other one, which was like,
Yeah.
lightning bolt hit me and I just decided like, I'm going to like blow up my life a little bit. And it felt actually comforting at the time.
And that was comforting. And so can you compare the two in terms of because so many people are so rational sometimes about this decision making to the extent that they're not moving because it becomes a barrier. Whereas when you have this emotional reaction, it almost like prompts you into the unknown. It prompts you into taking risks. So how would you compare your rational brain, or how would you kind of prioritize for someone who's going through this difficult time or this desire to transition, how to fight that rational brain and balance it with what your emotions need?
So for me in those scenarios, like the differentiator is fear. So like in the first more strategic pivot, I had a lot of fear. Like I was afraid of making a wrong decision, afraid of if I would be credible in this new role that I wanted to go after, afraid that I would fail, afraid that I wouldn't like it, or what. There's a lot of fear. The second one, that was this more emotional situation, I actually felt like I was free to fear. Like if something really terrible happens to you in work or life or something else, like the thing that you're the most afraid of happens, you suddenly just like give a lot less shit because you're like, bring it on. And I think in that scenario, that was really what prompted me to become an entrepreneur, right? I came home from Google that day. I said to Thornton, I want to move. He was like, great, let's move. Within a month or two, we had a new apartment. He was like, I want to leave my job too. Like, I don't want to go to this same job anymore. And he went and got a new job. And so within 2 months, it was like, wow, we're in like a totally different space, right? But again, it was working backwards. What would need to be true for me to feel like I had a different life or could like recharge my life? Well, I'd want to not be at this job. I'd want to make sure I have some way to guarantee income, right, for some period and can live within my means while I maybe don't have an income gap. I need to move. So I need to like give notice to my apartment, find a new apartment, like all of these logistics. And I operate really well with to-do lists and like executing against goal. So again, even as a person in an emotionally kind of turbulent part of their life, that felt comforting, even though it would probably scare a lot of people. I could control it.
So just a quick pause here. What you're saying is that you write down essentially your goal, or how you're saying what would need to be, like you write down the milestone you want to accomplish, okay? Let's say that could be launching a business or whatever that is. And then you ask, once you have that milestone, you ask the question, what would have to be true? right? For that milestone to happen? Is that essentially so, like, using the example of starting a business, uh, you then think about those steps that the person would have to take for them to hit that milestone, right? And then do you compile those little steps into actions that big actions, small actions? Like, how are you even thinking about taking those small steps in accomplishing that?
Yeah. Yeah. So great question. So yeah, so it's exactly what you said. What would have to be true for X, right? Write it all down. Or if you're having a conversation with someone about it, record it, right? So you have it, you can put it into ChatGPT or something so you can get a summary. But like what would now that we have AI, we can use it in so many ways as we're building companies. It's amazing. But what would need to be true for X, right? So again, if we're talking about for a founder, for instance, to start a new business, what would need to be true for me to start a new business and get funded, right? Okay. Well, first I would need to have, right, a team. Like what are all the things that would have to be true? I'd have to have a team and I have to have an idea, right? That makes sense. That has all of these things we need for if we're going to raise venture, for instance. It has to be a big enough market size. It has to be something that I'm credible at and to be the founder of. It has to be something I love and want to work on for the next 8.2 years or more, because that's how long it takes to go from starting a company to an exit on average. Then we would need to understand, like, okay, I would need funding. Like, how would I do that? Would it be from venture, friends and family, angels, a grant, like, right? But a list of all the things that would need to be true for me to succeed as a founder of a company that has funding, right? All right. So then from those, we can back out of that. That's like, let's say in a year, 6 months, whatever it is, I want this goal. So then what would have to be true, right, in a month for me to know that I'm on track to that goal? What would have to be true in a week for me to know I'm on track? In a day? We're literally counting backwards the whole time. So if we know the first thing is I need to start, I need to have an idea. Okay. So let's start iterating an idea, always with these guardrails of a due date. Like an idea is harder to give a due date.
So how do you do that? Is there like a recommendation of like when that due date should be with that idea?
It depends on all of these things, but let's say that you have an idea and you're going to give yourself a 6-month goal to get funded, right? Now, if you don't have a team, right, that's probably one of the first things that you want to do. Go find a team. So how would I do that? Am I going to go to meetups? Am I going to go into my network? Like I need to make a list of all of those things. I'm going to give myself a goal of like a month, let's say, to find a team or a co-founder. And then I'm executing against that goal. And if I get to the month and I didn't do it, I'm going to want to understand why. Did I not actually hold myself accountable? Did I not prioritize the right things? Did I do everything and this just takes longer than I thought? Do I need to push my timeline out? But everything that we're doing, right, we want, at least from my perspective, if we want to keep organized, so we have some kind of a list. We know all the things we need to do. We know what timeline we gave ourselves to hold ourselves accountable. If it's a top-down planning for anything you do in a startup, it's really hard to hold yourself accountable to goals, right? We need a combination of top-down and bottoms-up. Here's where I want to be by this date. Here's what I'm going to do to work backwards from it. In the meantime, here's what I know I can control from a top-down perspective, and we can meet in the middle.
It also makes it so much more accessible for a lot of people, right? If you break it down into these smaller steps, as opposed to being, okay, I need to fundraise X by 6 months, like break it down month by month, week by week. And also the reflection piece, I think, is very interesting to what you're saying. So it's not just about really moving forward with the steps, but also thinking through, okay, what went wrong this week? Why didn't I get to where I want to be?
You know, I'm a huge proponent, like the goal setting framework I like in all things, which I could use in this example too, is OKRs, right? OKRs were made famous they were used at Intuit, they were created Intuit, they were made famous at Google. I love OKRs, so we set a big objective. So our big objective is I want to be a founder of a company, right? And then we'd have to have key results underneath those that are measurable. Key results objectives are aspirational, inspirational. They don't have to have any measuring component. KRs are they have to be objective, right? So a key result would be have a founding team member, co-founder by Jan 1, right? I'm going to know on Jan 1 if I did that or didn't. It's objective. Either found a co-founder and we've decided to work together under that key result, right? What are the actions? Attend a meetup, date someone, right? Like get to an agreement, sign up, get the paperwork signed. We're going to have very actionable steps that every week leading up to that due date, I'm looking at those and saying like, have I done these things? Am I on track to hit this goal?
And you're not leaving room for interpretation. Like, you're basically saying they have to be essentially be true or false. Did you do it? Yes or no? And there can't be a room for interpretation.
And as we get into like this within a larger company, right, we'll use these as a team to build our OKRs for 2025. I'm doing that a lot with companies right now. And then from there, we back into like, okay, if we know where we want to be at the end of 2025 from revenue, customers, team size, right, growth rates, all these things, what would have to be true at the end of Q1 for us to know that we're on track for that goal? Okay. So then we break down our leadership team, team-wide 2025 OKRs into like, what do we need to do in Q1? And then that's the things that we're prioritizing as a team. There's no disagreement when we get to the end of Q1 as to whether we hit that objective key result. We either did or we didn't. And we can, like you had said, the very important part of this is that we do a retro. Like before we set our Q2 OKRs, what did we learn about what we did in Q1? Did we set them too high? Or did they too low? Did we underestimate something? What can we learn from that quarter that we can inform our Q2 goals? Right. So we're always learning and using things, right? Like say you'd never waste a good crisis. Like you don't ever want to waste a good opportunity to learn something. And then the other big part of this that I want to mention is that at my firm, we've actually did a study with a bunch of our CEOs recently around goal setting and OKRs. Who does them great? Who does them poorly? Like what are the patterns? And what we found is that culture eats strategy. So like, it doesn't matter how good we are at like setting the goals, right? Whether this is you as a person, as a founder, starting a new company, as a CEO of a growth stage business. It doesn't matter how good we are at setting goals. If we don't actually build into our culture, measuring those goals on a regular cadence and holding ourselves accountable to doing that, tracking against goal, doing these retros before we set our next period of goals, it doesn't matter how much we do. So it's really up to us to build this into the culture of our company and into how we even hold ourselves accountable if we're using this framework.
I'm assuming, speaking of pivots, that these postmortems that you're doing and these reflections on where you're at are essentially what's guiding the reflection on whether to engage in a pivot or even consider a pivot. So can you talk about that? Those market signals, essentially those, when you miss these goals, how does that educate you on where to move next, whether you moving full speed ahead towards the initial goal versus pivoting to something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a framework that I love to use in regard to pivots that's called the pivot pyramid. And I can share it with you guys after. You can send it out along with the recording, or if people want, they can Google the pivot pyramid and find it. It's not something I made up. But the idea is that, it's a pyramid. And the bigger the pivot, the lower down you're going on the pyramid. Okay. So like the very top of the pyramid is growth. So it's like, okay, maybe we did our OKRs for Q1. We got close to goal on a lot of things, but like we didn't actually hit our goal in all ways. Why didn't we? Oh, our marketing channels weren't working. We've been doing all of this marketing-led sales, and like we actually need to do event-led sales. Let's pivot this strategy and try conferences in Q2, right? We're going to try a new channel. So that would be like a growth channel. It's the very top of pivot. We don't have to change anything else about, our company, our product, even the people on our team. Hopefully we have somebody who can do some event marketing. Maybe we need to bring on a new event marketer, pretty minimal changes. Then we go down the pyramid. The next step is tech, right? Like, okay, so we didn't hit the number that we want to do as far as new signups for customers. Why not? Oh, we're missing a feature. Like, okay, we need to pivot what we've been doing to build this feature and prioritize it so we can unlock that next thing of growth. So now we're like the next step down of tech. It's a little bit more work, right? We're going to have to like prioritize what our engineers are doing, product, what is on our roadmap. Are we moving something around? Luckily, this goal setting framework forces that combo. So it's not just happening unintentionally or unilaterally, but like we're all coming together and deciding, okay, we're going to prioritize this feature because it's going to fuel, right? Help us hit this next thing we need to hit on our goal. The next, thing down is solution, right? That's kind of in the middle of the pyramid. Do we need to pivot entirely like what our solution is? Like it's not just a feature, not just a part of our tech. It's like we're not meeting demands of the customers in a way that we have to do a more deep pivot. The next one down is problem. Like, are we actually solving the right problem? Like, are we actually seeing that people like one particular part of our product and that's the problem and not something else? And then the very bottom of the pyramid, the base is customers. So is it like, wow, are we actually we create this product and it's for totally the wrong customer. That's a pretty major pivot. Like now we've got to change. Maybe it's SMB to enterprise. That means that we probably had to change all the other parts of the pyramid. The problem we're going after, the solution that we're building, the tech that we build, and our growth channels, and it's going to inform some team changes. So I like to think of it like that. So when the teams are doing these OKRs and their retros, if we didn't hit a goal, a growth goal, a revenue goal, we should be able, if we've done this the right way of measuring it, to tie it to like a reason why, right? And then that can inform like how big a pivot do we need to make, or is there a world where we decide that this actually wasn't the right goal in the first place and we force this combo and we change our goals as a team?
How would you take this mindset to one's own life, right? So I think a lot of our listeners are either solo entrepreneurs just starting out their journey as a founder. Maybe they're right in a career and flirting on the side about doing a passion project that they want to turn into something concrete. I'm just curious, like, how do you use the pivot pyramid for their own life, right? And that mindset. What are your tips there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think the pivot pyramid for a personal application, right, would have different parts of the pyramid, but it is this idea of like, I want something more, right? I'm at the top of the pyramid. Is it that I need, like, do I need to do something nice for myself, self-care, go shopping? Like, is it something I can change like in a weekend? Like, oh, no, it's more than that. Okay, is it something that involves what I do for a living? Like, do I actually need to look at a slightly different job? Is it something that it's going to require me to do more education? That's going to be a bigger life pivot. Is it something where actually like, do I want to move? Like, is there something I like all these other parts, but I don't like where I am. Like, I'm going to have to go figure that out. Do I not like my partner, right? Or do I want a partner if I don't have one and I want to prioritize that? I think that when you think through the things that you're seeking change, right? I'm seeking change in my life and I need to understand why. You can very much apply this framework of like, how far down the pyramid of like, back to this phrase, like blowing up my life, right? Am I on this? Is this something where I'm already doing this for someone else? I'm just going to go and start it on my own, but it's the same stuff and the same skill set and my life's the same? Or is this like, wow, I actually want to do something totally different and I don't even feel like the same person, my same self in 6 months?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's clearly a lot of different strategies that you can use both at work and in life to understand where you are and where you want to go. And then there's outside circumstances, the rest of the world and your environment and everything else that influences your happiness and where you go and your decision-making process. And you were talking earlier about this very traumatic experience you had earlier on in your career. And I know that you also had another health scare happen to you more recently. How did that, did that trigger a shift in mindset in terms of your life and where you want to go into both professionally and personally?
It's a good question. So I'll talk about that. And I think like, right, that first really traumatic event was like, I was at the bottom of the pivot pyramid. I'm like shaking it up.
Yeah.
Like I want a different career. I didn't change my partner, but other than that, I was like, I want everything in life to look different. I got a dog, I moved. After that was when I started my first company, which is just before I met both of you. But again, I did the same kind of framework that I use now, which was like, I want to start a company. What would it be? It started with an idea. Like a lot of founders, I experienced a problem. I was like, oh, I want to start a company. I didn't have the fear that I had before stopping me. And so it was like, all right, how do we execute against this idea? Okay, well, again, I had never done it before. So there was a lot of reading involved. What books would I have to read? Lean Startup, right? Eric Ries, Delivering Happiness, Shay, like, Venture Deals by Brad Feld. Like, how can I actually get up to speed on like, what does it mean to be a founder? And at the time, I really wanted to be a venture-backed founder. What does that mean? Okay. Learn some of that. Now, what would be next? Well, what do you need to get an idea off the ground? Like, you need some kind of legal formation, right? I'd been a lawyer. So it's like, we could do that. In my head, I was like, it was a consumer company. I need some kind of design asset. Like, I need a website. I need a brand. And so that company was essentially a Stitch Fix for maternity before Stitch Fix did that. I didn't know anything about business, right? I'd been a lawyer and but I had a goal and I was executing against it. And a lot of times that involved who in my network can I call to learn what I'm supposed to do next?
It's amazing because you thought about it. It was so methodical and so thought out in a way that I feel like a lot of people are not. Like I'm just thinking about Lee and I on our end. We oftentimes just make decisions and move forward with things like this podcast without really thinking through all these things, right? Like in a way, you really thought about it like an attorney, which really moved the needle for you in a way that was very successful. And do you feel like you've always had this sort of practical mind when it comes to decision making, or do you sometimes also let your intuition lead the way?
I think following your gut is the most absolute important thing you can do in life.
Is that the guiding kind of force?
But once you have that, once you decide, and I'm sure you guys did this more than you think, once you were like, hey, we're going to start a podcast, it was like,
Yeah.
well, we needed to start a
Yeah,
podcast.
of
We
course.
need an idea, equipment, a producer, right? You kind of go through the list. So it's I'm definitely making emotional decisions. I'm going to start a company and in the maternity space. Again, once I learned as I was doing this business and starting to, we had beta customers, we got all of the things we needed to do the business, raising money, all of it. And then I had started learning oh, one of the main things about businesses is what is your LTV to CAC ratio? What is the lifetime value of a customer compared to your customer acquisition costs? And it should be at least a 3-to-1. Well, if you're dealing with somebody who's pregnant and you're selling them maternity clothes, you don't have them more than 9 months or maybe a year with breastfeeding stuff. And so that was a very okay. That led to the first pivot of that business, which was to become a rent the runway for expensive stuff your family needs. And because it was how do we keep this customer longer? Well, we expand into other parts of their life. And so we did that. And then we learned there were other issues that come up in that business, right? Logistics, shipping. It was a rental model, but by then we had.
So it is all these things that come up. Essentially, you deal as you go, and these you
deal
can't
as you go.
predict. And no matter how rational you are, you can't plan these types
No.
of things.
But once you see the thing in front of you, it's kind of your job, right? To take the info you have, the data you have, and use your gut to make the best decision you can. And then all of these things in company building and in life, right, are a series of experiments. We're just constantly testing hypotheses to be I think this could be it. What's the framework for that experiment? Oh, did it work? Okay, now we'll do it again or do it more or do it different.
And I think there's also something in the example you're doing about this idea and seeing the problem and then that kind of shift. You have to be flexible and fast in essentially pivoting and moving based on the feedback you're getting, right? And then you can think okay, I'm getting this signal. I need to change course, and here are the next steps for that change in course, knowing what that milestone is ahead. I often see when I talk to founders who are flirting with the idea of a pivot, or they're seeing signals that are just to the outside eye being this is a bad idea, right? They take too long to actually take the leap, or they're trying to straddle two ideas at once. They're doing everything possible to not actually jump off the cliff in the new direction.
Because it's scary, right? And also if we invent these things, this is our baby, it's scary to ditch your baby. And so so then with this example of my life, this second company was called Expectantly, when you're expecting what's next, right? And so that was actually a good enough idea. And we were an interesting enough team to get us into the NFX Accelerator, which is where I met you guys, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I remember in my interview with James Courier, who's a mutual friend of all of ours, he said to me, you're a really interesting CEO. I remember that. And I said, oh, I'm so flattered. And he was like, yeah, you're working on a totally wrong idea for you or something. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, you're a lawyer, you're this, what are you doing with this company in this space, consumer or whatever? I was like, oh, well, said whatever I said. And he said, well, how long are you going to stick with it? And I said, as long as it takes, to see it through. And wrong answer.
I love it.
the answer is until I see the data that it isn't going to work, and then I'll follow that data to the next thing. And he was like, okay, and let us in. But during that program, as you guys know, because this is when we met, we made the biggest pivot I've ever made in a business, which was taking this business going, again, the whole pivot pyramid, I blew it up. Like, I was like, this thing is not going to work. Like, I don't want to deal with warehouses and logistics and cleaning people's other baby shit and like the last mile delivery and all these things. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm incredible as a founder for these things, but I definitely don't want to spend the next like 10 years of my life doing this. And that's when I learned in a lot of ways about software and was like, oh, like these margins are very attractive. Like, so you get engineers and product people and you build something and then people just pay you for it and you maintain it and build new features. But like, I don't have to go clean people's high chairs and live in a warehouse. Like, and that was when I really fell in love with software and like pivoted the company into a payments platform for the legal industry. I mean, it could not have been a bigger pivot. I like changed
So
everything.
drastic. We've gone through something similar, as you know, and I think we repeatedly mention it in our podcast episodes because so much of our success story is a story of pivots. Like whatever we do, we start with something, we just assume we never assume we will actually end with that exact idea. We always
Yes, we
assume it's
never
going to end
have.
somewhere else. We never have. And we're constantly almost looking for these signals in a way that they're so loud that we can ignore them. And then we proceed to whatever pivot we want to move forward with.
And as you were saying, it's like, it's so hard. Like there was a lot of me in that moment that was like, but I already did all this stuff. I raised money on this. Yeah, I have a warehouse. I have like the first rental relationships with all of these big baby brands. Like, am I seriously going to like blow this entire thing up?
But it feels so good too. It feels so good that moment when you're like, actually, I'm finally acknowledging to myself that it's not working.
Yeah.
Like I've been trying
Let it
so hard
go.
and I've
Let it
received
go.
so many signals. And the minute you let that go is so powerful.
So the sooner as founders we can divorce ourselves from being right? We are not trying to be right. We are trying to build a big business that like solves a problem that the market wants and that should exist in the world. And so if we can create a series of experiments that like give us the ability to say, okay, I was right, I'm not right, et cetera, and I don't actually care about the outcome, the easier the journey will be in company building. And like this stuff, back to you said something also, this health crisis, right? So like 2 years ago I got diagnosed with breast cancer and shocking and very early. And all these things like just for people listening.
And you actually found out through a DNA test, right?
I did.
A genetic, yeah, which is
I took
crazy.
the 23andMe test and again had that same feeling when I was like, I don't have to work at Google anymore. Like it was the same kind of like, I should take a 23andMe test. So like back to instinct, like follow your instinct. 23andMe test told me I had BRCA carrier breast cancer gene and started kind of following the path of the screening. And within a year of that discovery, they found early stage breast cancer in both breasts. And they never would have found it if I wouldn't have been high risk because I wouldn't have been getting MRIs for screening. But the same kind of stuff, like right? I have this massive new data set, right? That got plunged into my life of like an oh shit moment. But I kind of went into this mode of like, I only know one way to do things, which is like, I got to figure out what am I working backwards from and how am I going to execute against it? And so for me, it was like, I need a double mastectomy and I need it soon. Like, okay, I need, I'm getting appointments with doctors. I'm making an entire dossier of my medical history because it made me feel like I need to know how to talk about myself to the doctors. And they're not going to know every detail. But it was the same framework of like, I'm working backwards from being cancer free.
Wow.
That is my milestone.
Yeah.
What do I need to know and do and learn? And
Incredible.
what's the time period to do it? And like, I really deeply believe I got a double mastectomy a month after I was diagnosed. And the cancer was so small that I didn't need chemo. It was like stage 1A. And I deeply believe that like the speed and like following the data like is one of the things that I can thank for my outcome.
How incredible. Wow, you're so inspiring on so many levels that we could just keep on chatting for hours. Um, as a closing question, I would love for you to expand a little bit for listeners that are starting a new business for the first time.
Yeah.
A lot of our audience are women in this transition of life after kids a little bit older that are maybe either leaving a corporate job or looking to do something on their own for the first time, which is a major life pivot, right? What would be the one piece of advice you would have for these women?
Find somebody who did the thing that you want to do and ask them to talk to you.
Love that.
People will do it. They want to share their story. They want to help others. Somebody helped them. Like, learn as fast as you can from somebody else who did it and find something that's true to you. But
I love that. Yeah, just recap. It's so true and possible.
I mean, I've done that with you guys when we were founding companies. Like you both have been such an inspiration to me in what you went through. To close the loop, right? Like the third company, Headnote, the payments platform did become really successful. It did have a good exit. Like I got advice from both of you during that exit process because you had done it ahead of me. I did have 2 other beautiful kids who are amazing. Like things worked out, but
Things worked out incredibly well, Sarah. You're extremely accomplished and wonderful, and we're so grateful that you've shared this wisdom with all of us today. And yeah, thank you. I hope to see you here soon. My
Yes,
gosh, it's been too
sure.
long.
I know. I can guarantee you I'll be in New York, Lee, at some point, probably sooner than Lisbon.
Please
Alex,
keep me
again,
posted.
but I'll come back to Lisbon soon to see you.
Yeah, amazing, amazing.